Okay, in this edition we're on page 104 or 105. This is the blessing on prosperity, or earning a living, the blessing over the years. And we spoke about it yesterday. And we left over one phrase for today, Sab'einu mituvecha, which means satisfy us with your good. Always, when we ask for material support, we ask Sab'einu, satisfy us. The reason is because real benefit from the material world depends upon being able to be satisfied with what you have in the material world. Even if you have objectively a lot, if you don't measure it objectively, if you measure it subjectively, then you will not really have the blessing of material world. My Rabbi Zatzal used to say, the Gemara says, a person who has 100 wants 100 more. A person who has 200 wants 200 more. A person who has 400 wants 400 more. So, listen carefully, the more you have, the more you lack. That's not a stira. What you lack is what you wish you had and don't have. And it comes out that the more you have, the more you're missing. That's not a blessing. If your life is measured in money, the fact that you have a lot and you're getting more doesn't necessarily satisfy you. I remember I used to think about Bill Gates. I'm very old. I remember when he only had 10 billion. You can read about that in ancient history books. And then he had 20 billion. And then he had 30 billion. And then he had 40 billion. I asked myself, why does he get out of bed in the morning? To get 50 billion? What can you do with 50 billion that you can't do with 40 billion? What's driving him? He got up to 60 billion, and then he started giving money away. Because he discovered you can't make a life out of just making money. And he became one of the world's, over time, one of the world's most generous givers. Even Warren Buffett gave money to his foundation that he should give it away for him. So now, the question is, what is your attitude towards the material returns that you're getting? There's a verse in Mishlei. Ohev kesef lo yizba kesef. A person who loves kesef will never be satisfied with the kesef that he has. And there are two explanations what the word kesef means. Kesef literally means silver, and it often means money, and that's one of the explanations. And there it says, if you love money, you'll never be satisfied with the money that you have. Is that a blessing or a curse? That's a curse. No matter how much money you have, you're going to always want more and feel that you're missing out. The other translation of the word kesef there, I think it's Rashi's, is that kesef means mitzvos. So let's take this proposition. A person who loves mitzvos will never be satisfied with the mitzvos that he has. Is that a blessing or a curse? Blessing. That's a blessing. To be satisfied, there was a story that a man's son was very sick. They went to the Kotzker Rebbe to daven for him. And he said, listen, he's finished all of Shas and he's learned the commentaries. He's written brilliant chazis. He's such a tremendous scholar. Pray for him. And the Kotzker Rebbe said, no, he's not so tremendous. Not such a great scholar. No, Rebbe, he's really, outstanding. He's done so much. No. Kotzker said, if you convince me that he's done so much, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the end of his life. Let's talk about what he hasn't done yet. Let's talk about what he's missing, what he has to achieve. That's a reason that he should be alive. Can't present because Baruch Hu, here's a person with a completely successful life at the age of 35. Why should he live to 37? So, this is the difference between let's say the material world and the spiritual world. Okay, now there's a famous verse, the most famous single verse in all of Psuki Zimra, the verse of Posei Chasedecha in Ashrei. You open up your hand and you satisfy, let's say, all people. You satisfy people, right? What do you think it's talking about there? Spiritual or physical? You say physical. Yeah, everybody agrees? You're not sure. It's got to be physical, because if it's physical, then it's a blessing to be satisfied with what you have. If it were spiritual, then it wouldn't be a blessing. And the verse there is describing a blessing, something good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us. So I know what happens. When I heard the question first, I thought, this is Ashrei, and everything there is good, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing, so it's got to be spiritual. But no, if it says to be satisfied, it's got to be physical. Now, how do you achieve satisfaction in the physical? The short answer is, if you look at the physical as a means to something else, when you measure X and you say, okay, I'm going to get X, some portion, some amount of X, how much do I need? Well, how much do I need for what? If X is a means to something else, then I have a yardstick by which to measure it. There's a story of a guy who was going to the mountains in New York for Friday afternoon in the summer, driving, and he was late, very late, and he was short of gas. So he went to the gas station. They said to the guy, 6 gallons. He had a 30-gallon tank. 6 gallons? Just put in 6 gallons and let me get out of here. Because I only need 6 gallons to get to the bungalow before Shabbos. And I haven't got the extra 10 minutes to put in 30 gallons. So he measures the gallons by getting to the bungalow. Anything that's a means to an end can be measured, and you can say, I have enough, because you measure it against the end. But if something's a good unto itself, if you want it just because it exists, how could you say it's enough? If it's good, the more you have, the better off you are. So the trick to being satisfied with the physical material resources that you have is by seeing the physical resources as a means to something else. Now we have one of the names of the Creator, of Kodesh Baruch Hu, spelled Shin Daled Yud, and the Gemara explains the message in that name, Sha'omar la'olamo dai. He's the one who said to his world, enough. And the picture the Gemara describes is the world is being created and it's expanding. It's expanding continuously until the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, enough, stop. Don't talk to me about the Big Bang. Because it stopped. So, how did he say it stopped? Why did he tell it to stop? Because the Kodesh Baruch Hu was measuring the whole of the physical creation against a certain purpose that he had for it, and therefore he could say enough. We take the same attitude. We say the whole of the physical world is for the sake of my spiritual life. Then I can ask, well, how much is enough? And I can say that it's enough because I subjugate it to the purpose of spirituality. Someone once criticized something I wrote in my last book, latest book, I shouldn't say last. I'm working on another one now. He said, you measure your quality of life and you say that the Kodesh Baruch Hu favors us with the quality of life. Well, if you measure the number of millionaires, I don't see that you have more millionaires per capita, maybe less millionaires per capita than other groups. So I said to him, maybe so, but nowhere in our scale of values does it say that it's a goal to be a millionaire. So maybe we do have some millionaires, but that's not considered achieving a great Jewish goal. The great Jewish goal is to have enough that you need for the sake of your spirituality. So we wouldn't measure God's special providence for our welfare by the number of millionaires that we have. So when we ask for physical sustenance, we always say, Sab'enu, satisfy us, which means we're really asking for a double blessing. We're asking that we should have enough physical support, but we're asking that we should be able to develop the attitude that the physical is a means to the spiritual, and in that case, because it's a means to the spiritual, I can be able to be satisfied with it. And this really is based on something that I heard from my Rabbi Zatzal many years ago. Let's go back to that blessing, that verse in Ashrei. You open up your hand, umazbia le chol chai ratzon. Literally, if I read it like a 6-year-old with the dictionary, it would come out, you satisfy to all things will, ratzon. Satisfy to all things, will. That's very awkward, very disjointed. What does it mean? So many commentators do say it's poetry, and it means as if it had written, Masbiya ratzon kol chai. He satisfies the ratzon, the will of every living thing. Okay, it is poetry, and that certainly is a justifiable pshat. The Rabbi Zatzal told me another pshat, which turns out to be at Tzlach in Brachos. What if the pasuk had read Masbiya l'chol chai lechem? Instead of ratzon at the end, it'd be bread at the end, or food. Lechem can mean, and often means just food. It's not restricted to bread. You should know that. Daily sacrifices in the chumah, we have in the siddur, it's called korbani lachmi li ishai, and it's meat. Okay, so now he said, if it had said satisfies to every living thing food, you would understand. It means he satisfies each living thing by giving to that living thing food. The food would be the two. Okay, so now it says ratzon instead of food. So this pshat says it's the same thing. He satisfies every living thing by giving it ratzon, will, giving it a Kodesh Baruch Hu's will. Kodesh Baruch Hu plants his will in each living thing. Of course, in a squirrel, he plants only his will. In a hippopotamus, he plants only his will. In a human being, he plants his will, and he also plants Yetzer Hara, and he gives us free will, and so forth and so on. But our will, his will is there. Then the message is, you know how you'll be satisfied in the physical world? By acting on his will in you. That's how you will be satisfied. His will directs you to focus on the spiritual and to set that as the goal of your life. If you act on that, then you'll be able to be satisfied with the physical that you have. Okay? Now I will tell you because for you and also for the recording, I'm struggling with this. I've been struggling with this for even decades. The Rambam and now the Maharal that I happen to be learning at the present moment take two phrases from Chazal and they treat them as if they were. Well, the Maharal had something to say. I'll tell you what it is. They treat them as if they were synonymous. One is mistapek b'mu'at, which means he makes do with little. And the other is sameach b'chalko. He rejoices in his portion. And they treat them as if they were equal somehow. The Rambam in the Parish Mishnayos writes one right after the other, as if doing the same thing. For me, when I look at the words, the concepts are very different. Mistapek b'mu'at means two things. First of all, if I have a little, the word little is comparative. It always means less than what somebody else has. And mistapek means I'm not rebelling, I'm not condemning, I'm not bitter. No, I'll make do with it. I'll manage with it. Sameach b'chalko means, number one, I'm not just making do, not just managing, I'm rejoicing. And it's not a relative description, mu'at, which means a little, as opposed to others who have more. No, it's my portion. It's my portion. So I thought on my own, my portion means that's a portion that the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave me. And the reason I'm rejoicing in it is because he gave it to me. I have exactly what's been chosen for me by the Creator of the universe. Maharal says differently. He says it's my portion because when you eat what your hands have produced for yourself, that makes it yours. It's yours because you produced it for yourself. Okay, but still, my attitude in the second case is, this thing is precious to me, either because I made it for myself or because the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave it to me. And I'm rejoicing in the fact that I have this thing that's precious to me, which seems to me to be a very different attitude from mistapek b'mu'at, that I'm just making do with a little. By the way, this difference you find in the interaction between Jacob and Esau. When Jacob came back from Haran and he met Esau, and he sent Esau gifts. So when they come face to face, Esau says to Jacob, he says, Yesh li rav, I have a lot. I don't need what you're sending me. Thank you for your goodwill, but I don't need it. Jacob says back, take it. I want you to take it. I have everything. Yesh li kol. So, again, Esav measures himself against others a lot. That means I'm in the 97th bracket of taxes. I'm at the top of the society. Jacob doesn't measure himself relatively. He says, I have everything. Like, he doesn't mean he has everything. He doesn't have Esau's money also. He has everything that he needs. So Jacob is expressing this idea of Sameach B'Chelko, and Esav is taking this comparative stance. So I think the two concepts are very different. I think the message is very different. I can't see how they could be used synonymously. But that's what's said, so I'm obviously missing something. But the basic point that I wanted to get across, the idea of satisfaction in the physical, that's the goal that you want to have. That's what we ask for here. We're not just asking for the physical sustenance, that we should be able to have it and to be satisfied with it. And that means to take the spiritual attitude to it, that it's a means to our spiritual development. Yeah.
I just want the sense of this attitude. So the petition is entirely about the attitude, not about getting X amount. It's just about developing certain attitude for the share that we actually, or like, it's more like.
I hear what you're saying. The word actually, the word that we're using to make the petition is satisfy us. But I don't think it's meant in an unrealistic fashion. Even if I'm starving and I'm eating one meal every 3 days, enable me to rejoice with, be satisfied with that. I think it's not meant to address situations like that. The idea is to, although I suppose it could, but for the average person, I wouldn't put the burden on the average person to say, when you say these words, have in mind that no matter what, you should be satisfied. And I think that would be unrealistic for the average person. I think it's to cut off the idea of a person who has 100 wants another 100, a person who has 200 wants 200, a person 400 is 400, that your desire shouldn't grow with what you have. You shouldn't measure yourself comparatively, and thereby you should be able to make the realistic understanding that you have enough for the spirituality that you need. I think both are true, but I don't think you should push that to the end. A person could say, I think I need to have a whole shas because that'll help me learn. I only have enough money for half a shas. It's been that way for 3 years. So maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending you a message. Maybe you only need half a shas. You don't need the whole shas. That's where your spirituality lies. And then you have enough. And then you'll be satisfied. If your desires and your resources are out of balance, there are two ways to solve it. Either get more resources or reduce your desires. Right? What you're pointing out is that the sabedu part is on the reduce your desires side of the coin. I think that's right, but I don't think it's just no matter what I get, it's not meant to be passive. I'll stop working and whatever I get, please let me be satisfied with what I have. No, this is a petition that when I work, that I should be successful in making enough to be able to be satisfied with what I have. Yeah.
How does a person know whether he should reduce his desire or whether he should get more resources?
How does a person know whether he should reduce his desire or seek more resources? I don't think there's any general formula for it. This is a matter ultimately of self-knowledge. What will contribute best to my spiritual well-being, and this goes together with many such questions. My suggestion in general is that there are two ways to gather knowledge, two ways that I know of. There may be others that I don't know of. Two ways that I know of to get the self-knowledge to answer questions like that. One is to invest in a relationship with somebody who's older, well-experienced, has good insight, and has Torah knowledge, Torah understanding. So you can measure where you are, what your possibilities are against those factors, and give you a good opinion, which won't be infallible, but it often will be better than the opinion that you have for yourself. And the second is, let's say it's a question of working more hours or whatever it is, is to try it out experimentally. Don't say, I've evaluated all the factors and this is what I need to do. What you say is, I've evaluated the factors and it seems to me, on the basis of my present information, that's what I need to do. So I'll try it for a month and see what happens. This is true with any shift in your way of running your life, that it's a very good strategy to make the shift as an experiment. Because if you make it as a decision, this is right, and it turns out to have unforeseen consequences, then you come to doubt your judgment, and then you come to doubt your strength to carry out the whole project, and you become dispirited and demoralized. Whereas if you're making an experiment, that's what life is about. No one claims that he knows for sure what's the right thing to do. You make an experiment, you see what happens. Like getting up early in the morning to learn before davening. Well, my davening will be entirely different. I'll have an extra hour of learning. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah, it'd be wonderful. But in order to get up at 5 o'clock, you have to go to bed at 10, not 12. Okay? But then somebody says to you at 10 o'clock, hey, listen, I need help. Could you give me advice on the following problem? You think, no, because I have to get up at 5, you see. So I got to go to bed now, so I can't do that. And then you feel guilty. But 10 o'clock isn't so late, really, and it wasn't unreasonable for him to ask for help, and I couldn't give him help. Or you become irritable and you don't treat people nicely, or whatever it is. So you set it as an experiment. So here too, the idea of, let's say, working less and earning less and making do with that and having more time to learn. Maybe yes and maybe no. Maybe part of you will be resentful over it, or the other things will come up. So you do it as an experiment. I don't know that anybody could give you a rule when to reduce your desires or when to seek more material support. I don't think anybody could give you such a rule. It will require knowing who you are, knowing what your options are, and then making the best evaluation that we can. Once upon a time, this was not necessary. For the first 1,000 years after the exodus from Egypt, the Jewish people had prophets all the time. Our sources tell us that during that period of time, there were 1,200,000 prophets, 600,000 men and 600,000 women in a 1,000-year period. That's a big population. It means everybody had access to prophets. Ramban says that during a period of time, no one went to a doctor. Why would you go to a doctor? You have a physical problem. The physical problem is only a symptom of some spiritual problem. Go to the prophet. The prophet will tell you what the spiritual problem is, and you'll attack the cause, not the symptom. So during that 1,000 years, I wouldn't have to struggle with your question. You'd go to the prophet and say, what should I do here? Reduce my desires or increase my resources? Today we don't have prophecy. So we have big people, some of whom have siyata d'shmaya, they have the help of heaven, and some of whom you can invest in a relationship with, and that can be a very big help. And then you do it on the best information and evaluation that you can get. Okay, that's the end of this blessing. Now, in gathering of the exiles, sound the great shofar for our freedom. Raise up the banner to gather in our exiles. And gather us together, it's the same gather in Hebrew, from the four corners of the earth. Blessed Hashem, the one who gathers in the dispersed of his people Israel. Very short, but there are a few things here that I think warrant some thought, some investigation. First of all, you have two signs here of the beginning of the ingathering of the exiles. One is auditory and one is visual. So we ought to think a little bit about the difference between auditory signals and visual signals. Visual signals are very limited. It has to be daytime. You have to be facing the right direction. You have to be paying attention. A visual signal, somebody raises a flag, even in a crowded public area, could be that 5% of the people will notice, 95% of the people won't notice. Auditory signals, as you know very well, are designed to reach people paying attention, distracted, focused elsewhere, or asleep, like the sirens, which blow for attacks. So the auditory signal is certainly much more powerful, much more universal than the visual signal. When I think about that, my expectation would be, first it will talk about the visual signal for the elite who are looking for it and focusing and facing in the right direction. There was someone with whom I was very close in Baltimore, Rav Amram Taub, and he told me the story of a certain Rabbi who they were expecting guests Friday afternoon and they hadn't come. And shortly before Shabbos they came and they ran to tell him that the guest was there. And the person who told him said, "He's here!" And the Rebbe said, "The Mashiach is here?" No, we mean the guest. He's here without identification? He's oriented, the Mashiach. So that's the person who'll see the flag raised. Then, for the people who aren't facing in the right direction and who won't see the flag raised, then you would sound an auditory signal to awaken them, even if they're sleeping. That's what I would have expected. But the blessing disappoints me. The blessing says, first sound the auditory signal, and then raise the flag. So then my shot is wrong. The way I interpret it is incorrect. So what you have to say, I've asked this of people, I have to say is the signal that's supposed to catch our attention is auditory, because that way it can penetrate to everyone equally at the beginning. No two-tiered approach for the elite first and then for the ordinary people afterwards. No, it's a single signal that's democratically applied to everybody equally. And then raising the flag means it's going to be a perception of something that wasn't perceived before. It's visual. The flag is going to initiate a certain perspective or a certain quality of depth in seeing the reality in an entirely different way. I think that's what it has to mean. I haven't got sources on what that perception would be, but I think that's what you have to say about the difference between the auditory and the visual, especially coming in that order. Now, it says for our freedom. There are different words in the Hebrew language for freedom. This is one of them, cherus. But there's also chofesh, which means free. That's like summer vacation, when you're free of school. There's shichrur, which means to be released or freed. I'm missing one. Dror in Hebrew, what you say when you free the slaves. Right? It's called dror. So if one word is chosen here, pays to figure out what the meaning of that word is. Now, I have this again from my Rabbi Zatzal. Pesach we call Zman Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom. He told me, maybe it's found in other places as well, that this is a reference to what the Torah says about the tablets that they got at Sinai. The words of the 10 pronouncements were Charus al haluchos. Charus means engraved, but it's the same letters. Ches, Resh, Saf. Charus and Cherus. The Rebbe Zatzal said, when you celebrate freedom on Pesach, you have to be thinking, what is this freedom for? What is it investment in? It's investment in, 50 days later, receiving the Torah at Sinai. That's why we count 49 days in between, to connect them. So, Zman Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom, is the time where we are starting the process of receiving the 10 pronouncements which are engraved on the tablets. Now, that means that the Torah, the Chazal, when they describe the achievement of freedom on Pesach, chose that word, and not chofesh, and not dror, and not shichrur, but cherus. Chofesh in particular, there's a verse, I think it's in Psalms, B'mesim chofshvi. The dead experience chofesh. Chofesh means lack of responsibility, lack of constraint, lack of duty. Nothing binds them. Nothing restricts them. That the verse associated with being dead. I'll explain that in a minute. So, Cheres is the opposite of Chofesh. Chofesh means nothing restricts me. Cheres means my freedom is to receive the pronouncement Sinai and live up to that challenge. It's the opposite. Now, in this respect, let's ask a simple philosophical question. Does a rule that you must live by, restrict your freedom? The answer is, for sure. The rule says do X. So at the time and place when it says do X, you can't do anything else. You've got to do that. So definitely restricts your freedom. Now here's a more subtle question. Can a rule, which of course restricts freedom, also create freedom simultaneously? Let's see. Rule that restricts freedom, create freedom. Let me give you a very simple example. Let's take the rule, when you drive on the road, use only the right-hand side. What? 50% of the road is off limits? Yeah, 50% of the road is off limits. When you're going, only use the right-hand side. Is that a good rule? You bet, because if it weren't there, nobody would get anywhere. The road would be chaos. So by taking away 50%, I make it possible for you to go on the trip. Without that, you couldn't go on the trip. So it restricts your freedom, but then presents you with a possibility for you to choose which you didn't have before. Same thing's true with, let's say, the rules of games. I'm playing chess, and at a certain point, I take my knight, and I move it 3 steps straight forward and take off the other guy's queen. 1, 2, 3, off. And he says, you can't do that. I said, sure I can. Watch, I'll do it again. 1, 2, 3, off. No problem. But in chess you can't do that. Nobody tells me how to move my pieces. Nobody restricts me. Nobody makes rules for me. I move my pieces as I please. Okay, it's true. The rules of chess do quite severely restrict the way in which you move your pieces. But if you resolve not to follow the rules of chess, you can't play the game of chess. So the rules tell you, only move your pieces in this way, and when you follow the rules, you can play the game. Without that, you can't play the game. So the rules which restrict your freedom also present you with an opportunity that you didn't have. Okay, traffic is traffic, and chess is chess, but here's a really big one. How about the rules of language? The rules of language make communication possible. I'm a red-blooded American. Nobody tells me how to talk. Nobody gives me orders. I talk as I please. And, blue, pros. Okay, you can do that. No one will stop you, but you can't communicate. The rules of language make it possible to communicate with another person. So rules have this double effect. So now when we talk about Cherusenu, our freedom, which is going to take us to the rules that are engraved on the tablets, those rules do definitely restrict our freedom, but it make it possible for us to develop our spirituality, to have a relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, leading ultimately to a kind of dveikus, attachment to the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's the greatest opportunity in the world. Same thing's true with great achievements, creative achievements, whether they're technological or even intellectual, scientific. Today, anyway, all of them are based on systematized, regulated interactions between people. I think, if I get the number right, when they put the first man on the moon, there were 10,000 people involved in the various aspects of the project. Each one had something to do. One guy's job was X-ray the walls of the rocket to make sure that there were cracks in the rocket. That's what he did. X-ray the walls of the rocket. Each person did something. Each person did his own thing. Each person had rules of how it had to be done, so that in the end, you're going to have a functioning moonshot. Someone says, don't tell me what to do, can't be part of that moonshot. You can't have that. Same thing with an orchestra. You have 80 people all playing instruments, the notes are on the page, the conductor sets the tempo, also the interpretation, the phrasing, and you get great music because they take direction. So that's the idea of freedom, that it puts you in a position to do something you couldn't otherwise do, and that's why the freedom is compatible with rules. Okay? Now, it says, the second phrase is, Sones the kabetz kol yusenus, raise a banner to gather together our exiles, and gather us together, again, same thing, from the four corners of the earth. So, I don't know, it says to gather together twice, and once it even puts the together into a separate word. So some of the commentators here say there's being physically together and there's being spiritually together. We see that, don't we? Think of the last 8 months of history in this country and what happened in the last 3 weeks. Bitter division, condemnations, curses, destruction of property in the name of great values, in the name of great principles. A sizable part of the poor population bitterly opposed to another sizable part of the population. They're in close physical proximity, all right, but they certainly aren't together. Now, because of the tragedy that we're living with and the danger that we're living with, that's all put behind us, for the time being anyway. So when it says, gather us in together, together here doesn't mean just in physical proximity. It means physical proximity plus identifying with the same goals, the same values, the same project, disagreeing about means, perhaps, but identifying with each other. That's part of what we're asking for. And finally, maybe this is obvious, but I think it's very important. Who's the us? Gather us. You know, when you make the Passover Seder, you begin the Haggadah, you say, this year here, next year in Jerusalem, in the land of Israel. This year here, next year. So people have asked me, but Rabbi, you're living in Yerushalayim. Do you mean it when you say it? This year here, next year in the land of Israel? So I say, it depends upon who you're talking about. If you mean me personally, if you mean my immediate family, no, because they're here, except for when my son, one son is living in America, and our daughter is living in America. But if you mean the Jewish people, who's the we? The majority of Jews live outside the land of Israel. So when it says gather us, the fact that I'm living in Israel doesn't deprive me of this plain intention in the verse. I'm asking that the Jewish people be gathered in from the reaches of the world to the land of Israel together. Yeah.
Does it mean a different Jerusalem under David?
No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's Arad Israel, in the land of Israel. It doesn't say Jerusalem. Hashata Hocha, Shana Haba, Ba'arad Israel, in the land of Israel. So I have no reason to associate that with the coming of the Mashiach. Indeed, it's a very limited thing. One says, it's two phrases together. Ashata Avdei, Shana Haba, B'nei Chorin. This year we are slaves, let us be free in the next year. Ashata Hocha, Shana Haba, Ba'arad Israel. Here, this year, we're in exile. Should be in the land of Israel. Doesn't those things don't say that the Mashiach should come. And indeed, as we'll see when we get a little further in here, the idea of what's called eschatology, that's the study of what happens in the end of history, there are many different descriptions as to how things will happen. In particular, whether Mashiach will arrive and start the process of ingathering the exiles, and start the process of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, and start the process of rebuilding the nation's institutions, or whether he'll come at the end of it. And if you look at the blessings in the Shemona Esrei, the petition for the coming of the Mashiach is after all those things. After the bringing of the exiles, and after the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, and after the reappearance of the judges who are judging people, after that we ask for the Mashiach. So that can't be wrong. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that could be right, but it can't be wrong. I've heard people say, well, you came back to the land of Israel. If you didn't have the Mashiach, it can't be what God wants. That's not correct. That's not correct. The blessings here, put it in an order. We're coming back to the land of Israel is first. So, it might happen another way, but it's not ruled out. Okay. Now, the restoration of justice. Bring back our judges as they were at the beginning. And they probably say advisors, that's good. Advisors as at the beginning, two different words for beginning. And remove from us groaning, pain, sorrow. And you should reign over us alone, you alone, Hashem, with loving kindness and mercy. And should make us tzedek, I'll have to translate it for you, through judgment. And then it says, what do Hashem? The king who loves tzedakah and mishpat. So there are a few things here that need help or thought. First of all, it says, we're talking about justice now. So it says, restore our judges. Okay. You need judges for justice. And our advisors? Really? I mean, why are advisors in the courtroom? What are they? Are they the lawyers pleading the case? What are the advisors doing there? And then it says, you should reign over us alone. So what's the point of the judges? First it says, give us back our judges. And it says, you should reign over us alone. And then there's this phraseology, tzadkenu mishpat. Now, tzadkenu, what do they write here? Justify, which is not bad, even though it's very vague, but okay. Justify us. Now, mishpat can mean two things. It can mean in the process of mishpat, of judgment, or it can mean through the process of judgment, that the process of judgment should make us justified, not just coordinated with it or at the same time as it. Those are two different thoughts. And then you have the king who loves being justified and judgment, not who does it. I told you that generally the closings are describing Kodesh Baruch Hu as doing the thing that you are asking him to do. Here, like in Tshuva, it says, Rotze b'Shuva. He prizes Tshuva, not that he does it. We explained there why it says that. We have to explain here why it says that he loves tzedakah and mishpat. So first of all, I want you to know, it's general procedure. I don't know if it's always universal, but it's general procedure. Two people come into the court, and they have a case. And they have a disagreement about something. And by the way, it doesn't have to be acrimonious. There can be, I know many cases where people went to the court because something happened, and they themselves don't know who's responsible. And they both go to the court, they're both prepared to accept the court's ruling, and they're happy to carry it out. They just don't know what has to be done. I had that. I had a leak in my floor, which leaked down to the people below, and I happened to have seen casually certain Gemaras and certain Rishonim which say that I don't have to pay for it, that they have to pay for it. And I called up a Dayan, and he said, "You're absolutely right. The Gemara says, and the poskim say that they have to pay for it, but the minhag is you have to pay for it, and you have to pay for it." I said, "Okay, fine. I paid for it. There was no acrimony there." But when there's opposing sides, even without acrimony, I think you owe me money, and he says, "I think you don't." The first thing that they will do is look for a compromise. And indeed, there's a strategy similar to what you may have heard about Hillel, who sought to make peace between people who were out of sorts. Let's say you have 3 judges. One judge will take one of the litigants aside and say, "Listen, I see what your situation is. I want you to know it's controversial. I want you to know that these 3 major authorities are against your position. So I'm recommending that you consider compromising." And another judge will take the other one aside and say, "Listen, it's controversial, and these 3, a different 3, are against you, so I recommend that you consider compromising." And then they're brought back together, and they ask whether they want to compromise. And if they want to compromise, the case is settled with a compromise. If they demand din, if they say, "No, we don't want to compromise," one of the Torah says, then they'll carry it through. They'll just adjudicate these 3 against these 3, and maybe there are 25. And really it's 22-3. Right? But they don't have to be told that. The idea is to put them in a spirit of compromise. Why? Because in a compromise, the 2 litigants decided to accept it. If they decided to accept it, it's very unlikely that they're going, not impossible, it's very unlikely that they're going to have complaints afterwards. Whereas if they go for din and the president says, "You have to pay him because he's right and you're wrong," he's going to be upset. And he could come to badmouth the court, or be reluctant to take revenge on the other guy because he won the case. Compromise avoids those kinds of the deleterious consequences. So when we're asking for restoring the judges, we also want them to act as counselors to try to achieve a compromise between the parties, if possible. That's part of the judgment process. That's why I wanted to point out. It's here in the same blessing, because it is part of the standard judgment process. Now, remove from us sorrow and groan. Why would that be associated with Mishpat? So the Mishnah, the Gemara talk about the idea that there are verses like this, that Mishpat establishes the world, upholds the world, contributes to the survival of the world. And the reason it does that is because it promotes peace. And Chazal tell us that the only vessel that holds blessing is peace. So I learned that a long time ago. About 20 years ago, I went to Mexico City twice, and I found out what it means. Mexico has the natural resources to be the 5th richest country in the world. It has gold, it has silver, it has oil, it has uranium. Why is it so poor? I'll tell you why. Because a lot of people steal all the money, that's why. I was told that there's a city on the west coast of Mexico which belongs to a single individual. He owns the city. How did he do that? Very simple. He was a general in the army, and he ordered the army to build him a city. So it's his city. Got that? Right. That's even better than putting your money in Swiss banks, because here he owns a city, right? I was in a car, and being driven by a Mexican, and we were speeding, and the policeman pulled us over. So the Mexican said, watch what's going to happen. So the cop comes to the door of the driver and says, "You're speeding." I mean, I'm picking this up from the Spanish. And he said, "Yes, I was." So the cop says, "Give me $1." So the driver says, "I was speeding. Give me a ticket." Cop says, "Give me $1." He said, "I was speeding. Give me a ticket." Cop says, "I have a wife and children. Give me $1." It's a bribe. That's what I'm not here to stop people from speeding. I'm here to support my family. Give me $1. The corruption there is so deep, it's so pervasive that the resources are there. When I was there, this was, I guess, about 20 years ago, the population of Mexico City was 16 million people. 3 million were homeless. 3 million homeless people. In a country whose resources should make it the 5th richest in the world. Why? Because it was being stolen off the top. So there's blessing there, because Baruch Hu put tremendous blessing there, but it's not doing any good because there's no shalom there. And I don't mean shalom that you have an army that beats down the protesters. Shalom means integration, mutual responsibility, mutual caring. That's what shalom means. So that's the idea of removing from us groaning and sorrow without mishpat, without the ability to trust mishpat. You're going to end up with groaning and sorrow. It's very, very important. That's why they say about judges, a judge has to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, even if he did nothing wrong. But if what he did looks as if it were wrong, he undermines the respect of the people for the judicial system, and then everybody's going to look for a way to cheat. I'll tell you one final story. When the USSR was still in existence, about which you can read in ancient history books, we sent people there with sidurim, with kosher food and so forth and so on, and the KGB knew about it, and they had decided to allow some and not others, for whatever reason. A friend of mine who went said he was in the park in Moscow, and he saw someone selling burnt-out light bulbs. Oh, selling. Now, why would anybody pay money for a burnt-out light bulb? I'll tell you why. Because he buys the burnt-out light bulb and puts it in his pocket. He goes to work in the factory. When nobody's looking, he substitutes his burnt-out light bulb for the good working light bulb in the socket and puts that in his pocket. The supervisor comes along, sees the burnt-out light bulb. He goes to the storeroom and takes out a new one, puts in the new one, takes the burnt-out light bulb, and sells it to the guy in the park. Everybody's ripping it off. Why? Because they know they're being ripped off. They know the whole system is stacked against them. Workers' paradise, indeed. I said, if you're going to put me in a situation where you're stealing from me, I'm going to steal back. I have to survive. That means the whole thing goes down the drain. So that's the idea of the groaning and sorrow of not having justice that you can trust, because the bracha that Hakadosh Baruch Hu gives to you isn't going to be there to be used.